Hello guys, and welcome back to my job board mobile application, Fullstack mobile application using Flutter, Express.js, and MongoDB. So in this video, we are going to continue with our applications, right? So in this base video, what basically we are doing is we are going to be sending applications to companies, right? Vacancy applications to companies, right? So let me just give you an overview how we can send an application. So let's say if I click on the senior deep learning engineer, and then I click apply, you can see this bottom sheet coming up. And then I'll select my resume. For example, I'll select the data science resume, and then I'll then send the application. You can see application sent, and then we can then go back to browsing more jobs, right? So now, without wasting much of the time, let's get started. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to go to our vacancy details page, right? So let's go to our vacancies. Let's go to our vacancies and then screen and then vacancy details screen, right? Vacancy details screen. So if we go to our elevated button that we created, that is written apply, right? You can see here, we can show a bottom. We can show a bottom sheet, right? So this bottom sheet will then pop up like this one on the simulator there, right? So this bottom sheet is of type. So this bottom sheet is of type. This bottom sheet, what we can basically do is I don't want to have many lines of code inside our elevated button right here. So what we are simply going to do is I'm simply going to cut it, and then we are simply going to create a widget, right? So just call it widget application bottom sheet. Then what we can simply do is we can simply return a bottom sheet. As you can see, it's saying it's of type show bottom sheet. So in this case, we're using another library called modal bottom sheet, right? It's called show modal bottom sheet. So let me go back and then let's change it to show bottom sheet to show modal bottom sheet. But if you check on the modal bottom sheet, you can see that it's of type future, not a widget. So what we are basically doing here is we'll change this to a type of future, right? And then we also make sure that it takes in build context as a parameter, as an argument, and then we also need a widget reference because we are going to consume Riverpod providers, right? So basically what we want here at first is we want to have the vacancy, which we are going to just what I'm going to basically do is if I go here is I'll simply copy the vacancy right here, coming from our vacancy screen. So I'm simply going to copy it and then I'm simply going to paste it here. Okay, right. And then the other thing that we need to send an application is we also need a resume, right? So to do that, what we're simply going to do is we are simply going to watch the resume provider, the get resume provider. Getting resume provider, and then we are simply going to pass in the user ID .toString, right? Right there, right? And then now we have to deal with our bottom sheet, right? We have a context, and then what we also need is the background color, right? So the background color is going to be white. And then the builder is simply going to take in the build context, and then context. And then what we're simply going to do here is we're simply going to return a surf area widget. And then this surf area widget, what we're simply going to do is we are going to give it a height of 500. Right. We're going to give it a height of 500, right? Okay, surf area widget. And then the child of this surf area widget is simply going to be a size box. Right? And then we are simply going to give it a height of 500. And then the child of the, and then for the width, we must make sure that we fill those strings. So we have the whole width, we are going to use double dot infinity, right? And then the child is going to be a, want it to be a single child score view. Then call widget. And then we want to make sure that the main axis alignment, alignment is main axis alignment dot start. Alignment dot start. Same with the cross axis alignment, we want it to be cross axis alignment dot start. Okay, now we're done. Now we need the children, right? And then inside we are simply going to have yes, we need like some space from the top, which we are going to have a height of 20 pixels, right? 20 pixels, and then we're simply going to center the text, and then the child is simply going to be text. Then the text is going to be select your resume. And we're simply going to style this text. So I'm just going to make sure that we give it a color of black, and then the font size of 18, and then the font weight of bold. All right, now that we are done, the next thing that we need to do is we need to display our resumes. As you can see, we have these resumes right here. So basically what we simply have to do here is after our center widget, what we are simply going to do, say resume dot when, and then like when you get the resume, it's going to be a data list of resume, and then if there's an error, then in an error, and then a stack trace. And then basically what we are simply going to do is we are simply going to then error text. And then the error is going to be error.toString, right? And then for the loader, for the loading, what we're simply going to do is we are simply going to display a circular progress indicator, right? So let's just give a semicolon here, this colon there. Now let's take care of the data part. So what we're simply going to do is we are simply going to return a list view.builder, and then shrimp wrap is going to, we want shrimp wrap to be, that means that we want it to be able to take the parent widget's height, right? In this case it's 500, okay? And then the scroll direction is going to be axis.vertical. And then we also need physics. So the physics is going to be bouncing score physics. So as you can see, it's bouncing, right? That's the bouncing score physics. And then item, we also need an item count. So item count is going to be data.length, right? And then here, what we simply have to do here is for the item builder, it takes into parameters the context, then the index. And then what we are simply going to do here is let's create with the resume variable going to be data index, right? And then what we are simply going to do is we are simply going to return if the data dot is not empty, that means we have a resume, or if the data dot first dot resume is not equal to null. So that means that if the resume is not equal to null, then we want to display a resume widget, right? Resume widget that we item widget that we created in the previous video. So we are going to pass the resume right there, right? And then else what we are simply going to do is we are simply going to a column widget with a text that's going to display that you have no resume. So what I'm simply going to do is I'm simply going to grab this text right there. So let's grab this text. Then I'm simply going to paste it here. And then I'm going to change this to from select resume to you have no resume. And then what we are simply going to do after this text is we are simply going to have an elevated pattern. And then on pressed, we are going to have an on pressed method that's going to listen to the events when the pattern is pressed. And then here we are going to add resume, right? The text right there, add resume. And then let's just grab the text style here. And then let's go and paste it. Style. Then let's go and paste it. Then let's change it to 10. And then what we are simply going to do here is when this button is pressed, what we are going to do is navigator push named, right? And then we are going to provide the route name. So we're going to say route. Okay, let's check what did we name our routes. We call the class routes. Okay, so let's go back. So routes.add resume screen. Okay, this, and then okay, so now that we are done, so the other thing that we need to do here is make sure that we need to, when the user clicks the resume item widget, want to take them to the send application screen. So what I'm simply going to do is I'm simply going to wrap this with the gesture detector widget, right? and then we will use the onCheck method to make sure that when the user taps on that resume item widget, what we want to do is we want to check that the navigator push named and then we have to send them to the send application screen. So let's go back to our applications screen, applications, and then screen, and then let's create another file called send application screen.h. So basically it's going to be a stateful widget. Send application screen. Okay, so let's go back to our routes. Okay, so let's go back to our routes folder. What we are basically going to do here is we are simply going to add the send application screen, right? And then say send application screen. And then we're going to change this to send application screen. Send application screen. Okay, and then let's go into our main.dat file. And then we need to register this. So routes dot send application screen. Okay, take us to our send application screen. Okay, so now that we are done, let's go back to our vacancy details screen here. And then the route name is going to be routes dot send application screen, and then we also need to pass in some parameters. Okay, so send application screen right there, right? Okay, so basically what we can do here, now that we are done, what we can simply do is, so basically what we can do here is, let's go to our send application screen right here. So our screen is going to take in, it's going to receive a vacancy, because we need a vacancy ID to be able to send an application. So vacancy, and then also need a resume module resume. So this is supposed to be vacancy. Okay, now since this is now a dynamic, let's just get rid of the constant. Then what we're simply going to do is simply going to pass this what vacancy, and then okay, all right. So now that we are done, let's go back to our vacancy details page. So instead of using push named, let's just use push, right? And then here for the route, let's pass in material page route, and then for the builder we'll take in a context, and then what is going to do is need to redirect to our send application screen and then vacancy, you pass in vacancy, and then resume, pass in the resume. Right. So this should take us to our send application screen. Right. So now let's deal with the send application screen. Okay. So basically what we need is, since we are going to be consuming Riverpod providers, let's change this to consumer state for widget. And then let's also change this to consumer state. Consumer state, and then let's also change this to consumer state. All right, so now we're done. Let's just import Flutter Riverpod. Right, so what we are simply going to do here is we are simply going to return a scaffold widget, and then with an a bar, and then the title is going to be a text, and then the bar heading is going to be sent application. And then also have text style. Okay, let's do the color of black, and then also give it a font size. So a font size of 20, then a font weight dot bold. Right, so now that we are done, let's move on to our body. So let's just exit the app bar, and then let's go back to our body with the set area widget. Right, so the child is going to be the same child, and then child is going to be a column, and then children. Okay, so let's go and let's just copy the text from our title. So let's copy it. Then what we are simply going to do is we are simply going to paste it here, and then going to be your resume, and then we are going to change it to 15. And then what we're simply going to do here is size box, and then the height is going to be 20. And then after this, we also need a resume item widget, and then we'll then pass in the resume. So just pass in widget.resume. Then let's give another spacing using size box. So let's just copy. Let's get rid of this constant here, and then what we need here is an elevated button. So elevated button, then on crest, and then for the text, going to be sent application. Then we also need a style. We also need to style our elevated button. We use elevated button property. Elevated button, and then we use style form. Right, we then use style form, and then pick a color. It's going to be black. And then what we're simply going to do here is now we are simply going to watch reference to read. So we are going to read application controller provider dot notifier. If you want to access everything that is inside the notifier provider, we use dot notifier dot send application. So to send an application, we need a vacancy ID. So it's going to come from widget dot vacancy ID dot toString. And then we also need a resume ID. The resume ID is going to come from widget dot resume dot ID. And then going to convert it to a string. And then we also need a company ID also. The company ID is going to come from widget dot vacancy dot company ID, then toString. Then I think the company is nullable. And then user ID is going to come from user ID, right? And then status, resume status, we are simply going to set it to pending since it is not yet processed. Okay. So now what we simply have to do here is we need to get the user ID. So we're going to use final user ID equals to reference watch. So we are going to get it from our local repository, and then get user ID to string. All right, so let's just leave it in brackets there. All right, so now we have our user ID. Now our application is almost complete. Right, so basically now what we have to do is we have to work on the application confirmation screen. So if we go back to our application controller, you can see that once our application is sent, it's going to direct us to our application confirmation screen. As you can see from this, you could see that we had like a tick. So what I'm going to do is let's go to our application confirmation screen, and then let's just return a scaffold widget there. Let's just return a scaffold widget, and with a body, and then the body is going to be a column. Then main axis alignment, we want children to be centered at the center. Dot center, and then cross axis alignment dot center. Then any of children to the list of widgets, and then going to be center widget, then child. So there's no need for us to use a center widget. So I'm saying dot asset, and then it's going to come from assets, image dot assets, and then it's going to come from assets slash images, and then slash confirmation.png. And then then let's make sure that the height is 150, and then the width is also 150. And then fit, we must make sure that the fit is box fit.fill. And then what you're simply going to do is we size box some space, then we'll give it a height of 8, and then what you're simply going to do is we have a text widget, and then the text is going to be application sent. And then we also have to style it. So style, and then text style. And then it's going to font size of 24, and then font weight is going to be font weight. And then okay, so what I'm basically going to do is I'm also going to copy this text with its style, copy, and then I'm going to paste it below. Then here I'm going to change it to browse more jobs. And then I'm going to change the color to orange. And then let's also change the font size to 12. And then font weight.w font. Okay, so now this one we are going to wrap it with the gesture detector. And then yeah, make sure we check. We want you to take it to our main page from this navigator. Name it /. Okay. All right, so now we are done with our application. So basically what we simply do here is going to test it out, right? Like I'm going to launch another simulator, and then we are going to just test it out, right? All right, so resize the simulator, and then let's test it out. Seems as if we have an error somewhere. Okay. All right, so now that everything is done, let's just auto reload. Auto start. So there are errors. Let's say ship application, send application. Okay, so let's go to our send application screen. And there is an error somewhere. Okay, all right. Okay, now let's launch our emulator. Seems like there's another error again. Let's check what's going on. Vacancy must be provided. Required parameter vacancy. Okay, so let's go back to our application, to our vacancy details screen, I think. Then what we're simply going to show send. Okay, what did we name our bottom sheet? We named it okay, we named it application bottom sheet. Okay. All right. So now let's say we have some errors. Let's check what are the errors, but somehow everything is okay. Okay, I think I know what the problem is. So let's go back inside our main.dat file. So if we go to our lib folder, main.dat file, our vacancy, send application vacancy, it requires parameters. So let's just get rid of it. We ended up using the material page route is our navigation. Right, so now let's run our application. Let's see. Okay, so now let's try to send an application. Let's see if everything is working. Okay, so let's try to send an application. Okay, so all vacancies widget. So let's go to all vacancies widget. We forgot to add navigation. Vacancy screen, and then all vacancy screen. And then we have the vacancy item. And then we want to add a guest detector. And then on tab, we want to take us to navigator dot push named, then context, and then our routes. We need to provide our routes. So our routes is going to be routes. So it's going to be routes dot vacancy detail screen. Okay. All right, so now what we're basically going to do is let's reload our application, and then saying that null is not a subset of vacancy model in the typecast. Okay, so we need to provide the parameters. So of vacancy string here, and then we need to provide arguments. And then it's going to come from route settings, and then arguments, and then data, and then index. It's going to be data.data.index. Okay. All right, so now let's go to reload, and then let's check if it's now working. Okay. So it's saying route settings is not a type of vacancy model. So let's go back data dot argument. So it's saying it's not a type of vacancy model. Let's check. Data index. So what's going on? Because it's the same thing. So let's start, and then let's okay, so let's check again. Route settings is not a subtype of something. Okay, so let's use material page out, right? So let's use material page route, and then build a context. Then it's going to return our vacancy details screen. And then we can provide settings. We use route settings, and then our arguments are going to come from data, and then index. Okay, so let's auto start, and let's see. Okay, now it's working. Okay, let's try to send Let's try to send an application, and then send application, saying character unexpected 12 message. There must be something wrong. Okay, let's go to restart. Let's check again. Okay, let's try to apply. Okay, data science, and then exception formatted. So there might be an error. Let's check what's going on here. Got exceptions. Okay, let's try again. So let's try and pinpoint what the message is saying. So let's go to our send application screen. That's where I suspect there might be an error there. Let's send application screen. So we have vacancy ID, resume ID, user ID, and then status. So, okay, I think I get what's going on here. Get user ID is a method, and then we need to turn it to a string here. And then now let's restart and let's try to send our application again. So we're still getting the same error. Okay, let me check what's going on. Okay, so let me try to see what's going on. That was causing us not to be able to send the application, right? So basically what happened is if we go to our application repository, right? You can see we have the best URL and then we have the application by user URL. So this is when we should have an application URL, right? We should have an application URL. This should be application URL. And then the other thing is like, yeah, we also made a mistake. Instead of company ID, it's company, right? That's what we have on our backend, right? So now I'm just going to restart our application and then let's try to send an application. Okay, so let's apply for a DevOps position. So you can see that we have already applied for this vacancy. So let's try another one. can see that our application has been sent, right? You can see that our application has been sent. So now we can go back to browsing for job category, right? So in the next video, we are simply going to be working on the user profile. So thanks for watching, guys. Cheers.